Hello, everybody. A massive welcome to everybody who's attending today, our webinar in conjunction with Progressive Railroading. It's Daniel MacGregor here from Nexxiot. We're going to talk today a bit about rail freight and specifically digitization and how it's transforming everything we know about the industry. Now, before I introduce my guests, I'd like to just say a few words of introduction. The world is changing, and supply chain stakeholders have higher expectations around visibility and accountability. They want guaranteed delivery on time and in full, and they require dynamically accurate estimated times of arrival. So the world is changing and everyone's slowly digitizing or getting into this topic of digitalization. Shippers and cargo owners, manufacturers and retailers, they all require digital cargo services to improve, and they want to use them to improve their business processes and improve their planning. And specifically looking at rail fleet car operators, rail car fleet operators need to repair workshops and transport hubs all require accurate data to manage operations and to manage maintenance and to maximize product lifecycle management and all of these different aspects. Now, all of this needs better data. I'm Daniel MacGregor. I'm the co-founder of Nexxiot. We're digitizing the global supply chain, and that means hardware, software, and analytics. We're interacting with a physical world, so we have to realize that we need physical hardware devices to be deployed into that physical world to provide the data. So we're essentially a pioneer in this space. We founded the company in 2015. And making hardware is very hard. That's why not many people do it. But that's just an enabler to gather the data. And today I'm hoping with our guests, who I'll introduce in just a second, that we're going to be able to unpack a little bit where we are today and what this means for the industry, where sensors create data. What do we do with this data? How can we create digital services? How can we transform the industry as railroaders that we love and care about? So we're very fortunate to have some very respected experts. I hope I'm not going to embarrass you today, both of you, but I'm going to sing your praises for a second because we have some people who are extremely dedicated to improving this world, not just in terms of rail, but with a bigger picture and a bigger vision for, driving ESG targets, for bringing improvements across multiple metrics. So we're joined today with Mike McClellan, and Mike, he's the Senior Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer at Norfolk Southern. He's been a railroader for a number of years. I won't say many years, Mike, but it's a number of years. And obviously, as a stalwart of the industry and always looking to the next innovation and how to improve this industry, we're really fortunate to have Mike with us. Mike has a double hat, really, because not only is he an established railroader, but he's also leading the Railpulse initiative, which is sort of the group of operators that are driving digitalization across North American rail. Now, on to Adriene. So we have Adriene Bailey here as well. And Adriene Bailey, I met a number of years ago in New York at an event, a Rail Trends event, looking at the future of rail. And Adriene impressed me because she's able to drill into the detail, but also to look at the very big picture, the 30,000 feet visionary view, and also understand rail in the context of the wider supply chain. So she combines her strategic vision with her ability to deliver expertise niche to rail, and also rail in the context of freight markets. So welcome, both of you. I'd like to maybe give you both a chance to say, a couple of things, about what you've been working on recently and what's important to you in your different roles. And, bear in mind to the audience that we have, quite a good context here, because we've got Mike, who's very specifically focused on rail, and we've got Adriene, who's looking at, the benefits that this brings to the world. So maybe, Mike, you can say a couple of words first of all. I know you faced some challenges. How's your day going?
Day's going great. It's good to see everyone, and thanks to all the participants for joining. It looks like we have a good audience today. So, and it's great to see all of you, although I can't see all of you. So I'm head of strategy for for Norfolk Southern. And the great thing about being a railroad strategist is if you look it up in the dictionary, there is really no definition of it. So it's a large sandbox, and we get to do a lot of interesting things. But today I'm really here with my Railpulse hat on, and as many of you may or may not know, I founded the initiative now known as Railpulse, which was really intended to create an industry initiative to help accelerate the effective adoption of telematics on rail cars into the North American rail space, and quite frankly, do it in a democratic little d way so that it's for the benefit of the railroads, class ones, short lines, the shippers, and the car owners as well. So we put together a great coalition. I think we'll probably talk about that a little bit more, but it's been a particular passion of mine, and I'm proud to say that it's moving along pretty nicely.
Thanks so much, Mike, for that intro. Adrienne, over to you.
Sure, thanks, Dan. Great to be here with both of you and everybody who's on the call. My name's Adriene Bailey. I'm a partner with Oliver Wyman. Oliver Wyman is a global consulting firm that has a very, very strong presence and practice in the rail industry, both passenger and freight across the globe. I'm lucky enough to lead the rail practice for North America. I spent my career at 2 Class 1 railroads and then moved into being a customer of the railroad, primarily in the intermodal space. But I'm a very, very passionate believer that rail is an incredibly important component of the future of freight. And we are standing in the midst of a pivotal moment in the industry. And it's incredibly important for us to move forward in the right way and make the right choices in this industry for its long-term health and success, which is so important to so many stakeholders.
Thanks, Adrienne. So just another quick word from me. This is the kind of thing that we're talking about. This is a hardware device that goes onto rail cars. And this is it gives a visual idea as to what this is all about. So obviously the hardware device is the one that takes the data from the assets. And then we get into the topic of who needs that data? What do we do to that data to create value? In fact, even on a more fundamental level, what is value in this modern world? Actually, data is a source of value, but only when we actually create context and meaning from that data do we actually derive that value. And I think, what we're doing today is we're bringing together different aspects of the discussion. So I don't want to sort of hang around on the introductions for too long. I think everybody's got a handle on who we are. And now I'd like to move into, maybe the first question. And I guess, let's look at the past for a little second. Mike, what's been on offer in the past for railroad operators, for fleet managers, for rail cars. Now, it's worked until now somehow. I mean, it does work. Things do travel by rail and arrive, yeah? The Class 1 railroads have provided the data. Can you describe a little bit about that sort of legacy?
Yeah, I mean, the way that data is collected from the railroads now it's a combination of things. It's manual input. It's AEI scanners, which is RFID essentially. It's other types of CLM events. And this is all input not only by the Class 1s, but by the short lines as well. And it does a good job of providing a mosaic of where cars are they moving or not? But quite frankly, it's a technology. If you think about RFID technology, it's almost half a century old, right? The railroads adopted it in 1992. And the reason that I got so interested in telematics is this. I mean, for 18 years, I ran every business at Norfolk Southern except for coal. And what became very apparent to me at NS is that, the quality of the data we were providing, let's call it 80 or 85% in terms of accuracy, timeliness, or availability. And it wasn't getting better. And there really wasn't a path for it to get better. And in the meantime, our competitors, trucks primarily, but also barges, delivery trucks, whatever, were adopting telematics. And so now while we were providing locations of cars anywhere from, every 4 hours to every 4 days, our competitors were providing it every 5 minutes. And this is the kind of visibility that the market expects. And quite frankly, the railroads did not have a pathway as an industry to provide that kind of visibility. As such, my belief is the merchandise business in North America has been declining since 2006. And I think one of the key reasons that it has been declining is because we have not been able to meet customer demands, particularly customer demands on the things you mentioned: visibility, ETA, condition of the car, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where we've been. And that's why the members of Railpulse, I think, are so passionate and committed to making this transition to a telematics future.
You mentioned RFID, Mike, and I think that's a really interesting point because, for RFID, it is great, actually, isn't it? You just need a reader. We know from when we go skiing, you've got a ski pass, you can just, it bleeps you through the gates, maybe to Adrienne for a second, if we look at the wider supply chain, because we're always trying to think about rail in the context of the wider supply chain, it's part of the supply chain, it's an essential part. Isn't it amazing? We've all had mobile phones and we've had GPS in our vehicles 30 years it's been now. And yet we've got 30 million shipping containers in the world, 5 million rail cars, 1 million tank containers. None of them are tracked. And when I tell people this, everyone's like, really? Why is this? I mean, is it just because it's slow? Is it because it's, entrenched in its own legacy? Or, is it because we don't really know the use cases? What do you think?
Well, I think that part of the issue in our supply chain world is the fact that we have so many stakeholders. And so these assets pass between operating control, shipper control, different modalities. And so really ownership is harder in that environment when it comes to these kinds of information digitization applications. And it goes back to use cases, Daniel, which is the use cases spread across all those stakeholders. How do you get the impetus for people to come together, decide on a solution that's going to work for everybody, and then fund that across that broad group? So if you're a trucker, you kind of got everything in your own house, and you can make your own business case, and you can develop the ROI on moving towards these kinds of applications, and it's very contained. If you're a container provider inside of a giant steamship line network, and that container moves through all of these different phases and through all of these different handoffs with all these different players, I think that becomes one of the barriers that has caused us to be slower in this adoption.
I think that's a really good answer. And actually, it brings us on to the next question that I have in my mind as well, because, let's just give a bit of context again. Nexxiot, founded in 2015. Immediately, we realized we wanted to target the maritime space. We realized that the maritime shipping lines were not ready for this. They didn't know what to do with the data. They weren't very profitable at the time. That's changed now. But we flipped to rail quite quickly because we realized, it's a non-powered asset that doesn't have, the ability to send its data, and it seems to make sense that it can. So, when we look at European market, rail companies are not really competing. They're competing against road. And obviously road has been winning against rail for year upon year upon year because they've been able to accelerate the benefits of digitalization, guarantee on time, in full delivery, manage that first and last mile. They don't have to align with other modalities. The truck drives the full distance because roads go nearly everywhere. Now, let's just look at the Railpulse initiative, Mike, for a second. How does it inspire collaboration? How on earth did you get these people together to actually agree on a common project? It must have been amazing.
I have pictures. No, yeah,
good.
I want to go back to what Adrienne said, which is, the why hasn't this taken off? And she's absolutely right, which is, think about the rail ecosystem in North America. It's 600 railroads, including the 7 Class 1s. It's over 1,200 unique rail car owners and over 10,000 shippers, some of whom are also rail car owners. The Class 1 railroads only own 17% of the North American fleet. They also own TTX, which owns another 10 to 11%. But even then, you're only talking about the railroad industry owning about 25% of the North American fleet. So the problem really isn't a technical one. as companies like Nexxiot really perfect the technology. It's really a business problem, which is how do I get 600 railroads, 1,200 rail cars, and 10,000 shippers, all of whom sometimes have conflicting interests. How do we get them to agree? And that was my job. I mean, that's what I set out to do. And I will tell you that the common thread, I started this in 2019. I met with over 80 customers, 80 participants in the rail ecosystem to get their opinions on this. And, some of them said to me, hey, by the way, if this thing takes off, we want to be part of it. And thus the 5 founders became Norfolk Southern as the founding member, and then GATX, Genesee and Wyoming, Watco, and Trinity. And the core, the foundational premise or belief that we all had, maybe as a passion that we all had, was that we believed that this was critical to allowing the railroads to gain share, particularly in the merchandise space. So with that as our foundational premise, and by putting some guardrails around what we could and could not do, that's what really got us started. So we set the table, if you will, and then we began talking to other participants. We've talked to all the Class 1 railroads. We've talked to almost all the major leasing companies. We've talked to major shippers, et cetera. And everybody who owns a rail car is going to be invited to be a subscriber or participant in some way with Railpulse. Again, it's intended to be a very democratic industry initiative, little d. And so since then, the Union Pacific has joined as an owner. Greenbrier has joined as an owner, and I will tell you, there's a lot of interest in this as well. We're definitely picking up momentum and interest. But right now, the 7 of us own over 30% of the non-coal, non-intermodal North American railcar fleet. So this is a group that, quite frankly, has a lot of standing. And I think that's one of the things that's driving momentum. Now, somewhere in there, I think I answered your question.
No, I think that all of those were very relevant points, and I think it takes the discussion onwards effectively. And I'd like to say at this point, congratulations as well, because it's an incredible achievement to reach this point. When you look at the culture, at the legacy culture, and to get everybody aligned and to understand that it's extremely relevant for them, they have to be involved, they can't get left behind, is an incredible achievement. Now, we've seen the supply chain come under some pretty intense scrutiny in the last few years. It's had to deal with things that it probably wasn't initially designed to deal with. And these words like agility and flexibility and even elasticity, these kinds of words have become, sort of the semantical, connection to our business. Now, when we look at that supply chain, I'm thinking particularly of the tracks, strewn with boxes that we saw a few months ago with the, e-commerce freight getting, the rail cars getting broken into and so on. And it was a shocking moment. And do you think that people have really changed their thinking around this over the last couple of years? Are people feeling vulnerable and more that they need that data and that reliability and agility in the modern supply chain, and rail to play its part in that? Is that sort of something that you've also noticed, Mike?
Okay, that's questions for me. Yeah, obviously that was kind of, I think that was kind of stunning for a lot of people who aren't really used to rail. And, where we're headed is not going to solve theft and things like that. But I got to tell you, it's really going to help us create systems and processes to identify, control, and ultimately eliminate it. For example, one of the things that we are looking at is, one of the sensors that we're going to require as a Railpulse subscriber is doors open, closed. And if we get an alert that a door is open and it's not the origin or destination zip code that it's supposed to be opened or closed in, then that's going to get alert. Listen, this door is open for some reason in a place it should not have been opened. The railroads operate in a large, expansive space in North America, but this is really going to help us pinpoint places where you have these kinds of problems, and then begin to sort of strengthen and harden those points by having these types of alerts.
Thanks for raising that interesting use case, and we'll get towards use cases a bit later in the discussion. I think that one of my points around those thefts that we noticed and the shock of that really was that if we can keep the rail cars flowing and they don't stop in areas that sort of the high risk zones, then it's less likely to happen because it's harder to get things out of a moving rail car. But I agree with you, there's lots of possibilities to add sensors and so on. Now, maybe back to you, Adriene, for a second. Let's just talk about economic prosperity and, this. I know that North America was really built on rail in the very early days of the expansion across the continent. A new city sprang up when every new station was built, and it was a bit like that, wasn't it? And now it obviously has a part to play. Maybe you could tell us, how is it aligned with the wider supply chain, and where are the weaknesses at the moment? How easy is it for rail to integrate itself currently with the current status quo?
In this current moment, Dan, we are at a point that I don't know that we've seen before in terms of the difficulties that all of the railroads are having in terms of getting the system velocity where it needs to be. And we have all sorts of reasons why this is happening. And many of those have to do with the labor situation in this country, and it manifests all over the supply chain ecosystem, where we can't get enough folks to work in the warehouses, and the warehouses become full and back up, and then we can't move the equipment and turn the equipment, and then we don't have the equipment to unload. And so this thing is a giant interconnected network. And we have to recognize that all of these things interplay with each other. And the minute we get the system congested to the point where we don't have the ability to flush and get back to that velocity, we've put ourselves into an untenable position that no supply chain can really tolerate. At the end of the day, though, the alternative, which is a world without rail, if we think about the economic burden on the continent by moving away from rail the way we've been doing, and all of the non-calculated costs to all of us, whether it's congestion or road construction or energy consumption, et cetera, what that is, all of that added together is a huge, huge drain on the future ability of the economy to thrive. So we're very passionate believers that we have to create the environment where railroads take more market share off the highways and do more in order to integrate into supply chains. And I'll just say one more thing about your prior question around agility and flexibility. My sense right now is we've never been in a moment where it is more important for the railroads to become much more scheduled, much more deterministic. It's what people who want to work for railroads need in terms of managing their lives and their work at the same time, giving certainty to when I need to be at work in order to accomplish what needs to be done. There's never been more pressure out of the shipping community to say, this is what I need. You said it at the beginning of the talk, on time and full. And on time means reliable. It doesn't have to mean fast. And we need railroad operations to move to a place where we haven't seen in the United States, in North America ever before, in terms of the reliability of the ability to move freight from origin to destination in a consistent way. And all of this data, not just the data on the cars, but data around crews and data around yards and data around line of road systems. All of this data is absolutely mission critical for us to move to an environment where the railroads have the tools and the capabilities to run at a much higher degree of reliability through a scheduled network.
I love that contribution, Adriene, because it really sort of wraps that part of the discussion up, and it gives us a chance to understand the relevance as we move forward in the discussion. So one thing that I've just been thinking of, I mean, rail apparently, I didn't do the calculations myself, but it's more efficient from an emissions ESG point of view, sustainability, 5 to 7 times, they say, more efficient, in terms of, now obviously efficiency in sustainability is shooting up everybody's agenda, the shippers and cargo owners. It's one of their metrics for performance. And something that, connecting it with something that Mike said earlier about systems and processes, improving systems and processes. Obviously it starts with data, and we want to improve our systems and processes, and we know why we want to do it. Sort of roughly, it's about improving efficiency, sustainability, increasing visibility and reliability, and so on. Where's the innovation here? Maybe Mike can help us out with this. I mean, what we're talking about, I've shown a hardware device. Clearly, that produces data. Is it the hardware that's the innovation? Is it the platform? Is it bringing it together? Is it making services, or is it all of that?
Well, there's a lot of questions in there, so let me.
Yeah, but I give you some freedom, though. I mean, you can talk about what you like.
I'll explore the space here. The fact that the way the Railpulse is set up is that in terms of the hardware, there's multiple providers of hardware out there. Nexxiot clearly is in the pole position in a lot of ways in that, but there are other providers out there, Daniel. And what we intend to do is to set the standards for cars, and then let the car owners make the decision about who they're going to use for the data, for the comms, et cetera, et cetera. What Railpulse is going to do is we're going to set the standards for this. The data, much like railing today, is going to come to Railpulse. We're going to convert it into one language, and then we're going to enrich the data with waybill data, CLM data, AEI data, UMLR data, et cetera. And so then we'll have a sort of a common language of a very enriched data set. If you're a rail car owner, that data comes back to you, and it comes back to you for free. You also have to license that data for specific uses by Railpulse, specifically that some of these data go back to the railroads, so that ultimately we can use these data to replace AEI, CLM with telematics data, and to do that. In terms of how customers, the 1,200 car owners, the 10,000 shippers, the 600 railroads are going to consume the data, I think there's going to be a lot of innovation there. There's a lot of opportunities for innovative companies to work with these, the people who have access and ownership of the data, to really use it for competitive advantage. And I think that's going to be a very exciting space overall. So if you think about the architecture, there's really three levels here, right? There's the hardware side of it, getting the data off of the rail cars, the translation phase, which is bringing it together and enriching it. And then there's the use cases ultimately, which is how do I take this thing? And right now, railroad data is a garden hose. And all of a sudden, rail data is going to be a 24-inch pipe. The average rail car today, you probably get anywhere from 75 to 150 events on a movement. You're going to get thousands of events and alerts associated with every rail car. And the winners in this are going to be the people who can take that data and really drive towards an exception management based operating environment. You talked about service. This is not going to solve labor shortages, but this is going to help the railroads make service better. The quality of ETAs we provide to shippers is going to get better because of this. Our ability to move equipment faster is going to get better. So this will make the railroads better operators. It will give us the tools we need to be better operators. Again, it's not going to solve labor shortages, but it is going to help us make the rail space more competitive. And as I said at the beginning, that's really the foundational principle and passion of the founders of Railpulse, is to make rail more competitive and get more share back on the rails for all these good things that happen, ESG, supply chain cost reductions, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how the technology works, and that's how we envisioned it. But lots of room for innovation and competition on the hardware side, as well as the data use side.
I'm really happy for those comments. Add anything you like, Adrienne, because I'm sure there's lots of things.
I want to point out for our audience that Mike and the team at Railpulse did two things that in our human world of today are kind of unnatural acts. But they convinced people to let go of this idea that if I do it myself, somehow I get special super return. We had to let go of that and do it together to create the standards that would unlock the massive benefits that could come by us creating an industry platform. The second thing that got accomplished here was that we created an organization of the industry for the industry which means that the data is in the hands of the participants, and we're not involved in an environment where somebody stood something up, created an ecosystem, took our data, and now sells it back to us. So I'm just hugely impressed with what was accomplished here. This was a massive undertaking, and it's a huge benefit for all of the participants in the rail ecosystem.
I agree fully. It's actually completely visionary, because unless you had that and brought those people together and had the strong leadership and the belief, within those sort of, visionary and strategic leaders within the space and within the Railpulse group that you've managed to bring together as well, Mike. And, I also want to say, the recent arrivals in the Railpulse group really have add a lot of gravitas as well. So, you made a great point about it's not going to solve the people shortages or the labor shortages, but in a way it does as well, because it solves lots of things. And I don't want to say it completely solves it. We're not there yet. But obviously, if you can deploy the experts that you have to the right places with the right information, the right tools in their hands, being prepared to do the work, and that they're not sent to the wrong place or something critical is not there that they need, etc., then you get better use of the people, but also they also get a better experience at work because they feel more satisfied to be able to make a difference. Because I know that railroaders are incredibly, dedicated and hardy bunch of people who are really committed to doing the best job that they can. But, let's be honest, it's quite a thankless task sometimes. You're out there in isolation, with the wrong information in all weathers and, trying to do the best you can and, sending messages to your colleagues and so on. Also, the other thing is that it attracts new people to the industry because it starts to become an exciting space where it's data driven and you can bring innovation to the space. So, those things are extremely relevant. Now, we hear all the time that data is the new oil. Yeah. So I find these phrases kind of laughable because, obviously we're all moving away from oil. But, my catchphrase there is, if data is the new oil, why is nobody refining it? Yeah. But actually, we are trying to refine it. Now, let's talk a little bit about how we get value from raw sensor data. Because, what is data? Is it zeros and ones? Once it's zeros and ones in your system, you can sit on it very happily. I've collected the data, but so what? What can we do with it? And then we talk about a word like a platform, and everybody seems to be building a platform these days. And I know that, the Railpulse initiative depends on the collaboration and the agreement and the standardization of things that go into that platform. So how can we take that next step? And I leave it open to either of you really to comment, because I know that I've got my perspectives here, but Mike, I know that you've thought a lot about this as well.
Well, Adrienne, do you mind if I start here, and then you can, add value? But when I'm putting on my railroad hat now, and I really see this as a 20-year data journey. And it's not just data, of course, because, this 24-inch pipe is going to come in and, you can drown in the data if you don't do something with it, right? But, we're starting off when you think about how we are rolling this out, there's three components of it. There's location, which is the GPS, the condition, the commercial condition of the car, empty, loaded, doors open, doors closed. And then there's the health of the car. And the journey that we're beginning is we're starting on what I'll call non-safety critical components of this: location, impact, doors open, doors closed, load, empty. All right. Generally non-safety critical things we don't necessarily collect at this level of quality today. As we are able to prove to the industry that we can pull these data off of the rail cars, deliver them with 99.9% accuracy to the railroads, the dispatch offices, et cetera, that's when you're going to start to see safety critical sensors begin to move on the rail cars. So think about this. Think about handbrakes. Think about the alert, handbrake on, car in motion. I don't want to tell you how many times that happens on the NS, but it happens a lot. That causes safety concerns. It certainly damages wheels. It stops trains. It reduces productivity. Hotbox detectors. There's 5,000 or 6,000 hotbox detectors out there measuring the heat of the bearings and the axles as it goes by a hotbox detector. Why don't you just have that on every axle? And instead of waiting every 75 miles to get that alert, you get it when it happens. Hey, there's a increase in temperature on this thing. Let's stop the train, not in the middle of the railroad, but someplace convenient, and set out that car and do something about it. And so there's all sorts of ways that we're going to take this. We're going to make the customer experience on the front end much better, improve the competitive advantage. But as I say, I think this is a 20-year journey where we really drive safety critical devices onto the rail cars, make the rail cars safer, and make the railroads, quite frankly, more fluid by having this real-time data on the condition of the cars.
Yeah, I love that context, and thanks for putting it so simply. And Adrian, I remember from your presentation, you were drawing direct parallels between safety and productivity. I don't know if that's what you want to add to this, but have you got any comments that sort of, about how we can progress on this data journey and create value from it for any of the stakeholders that are involved?
Well, I would echo everything Mike said. I think another important aspect of this is around the innovation enablement, that the way Railpulse is set up, there's the opening for all sorts of parties who have ideas and capabilities to bring to the data and create value there. And so the value creation is not in I control the data. The value creation is in who's got the best ideas and how can they bring those things to market for all of us to take advantage of. And I think that's another huge win for the way that we're approaching this.
I think that makes it incredibly exciting. And obviously you start to think about attracting, one of the guys in our team he was looking for the Higgs boson on the CERN data, the Large Hadron Collider, looking at, the elementary particles and so on. And now he's looking for interesting things in railcar operations. And you wouldn't think that it would be able to attract such people. But so let me just do a quick roundup of some of the things that it will impact. Maybe then we'll take a few questions from the audience. I think that we've covered some quite interesting things, and I don't want to, like you just said, Mike, drown people in information. So we try to keep it fairly elegant. But what it means for the industry, I'll just fire a few things out here: fleet availability and operational efficiency, maintenance cost control, workforce deployment, cargo received on time and in full, or even accountability to third parties who are doing important things in the supply chain. And then we have like the future decisions. How do we evolve our thinking to integrate this data-driven value in the future? And like you said, Mike, it's 20-year journey we're beginning. We're kind of babies in this, in a sense, and we've got a lot to learn. With data, you don't not yet know what you don't know. Actually, it's a bit like building the ecosystem around the Apple Watch or fitness trackers. Because at the beginning, it was just, let's measure your pulse and make sure that you've got to have doing a good workout. And then soon it's make sure you had a good night's sleep. And, these other services that are sort of built on top, on the ecosystem. Maybe we just jump to a question or two from the audience, because, we are sort of running through the schedule here. Basically, a guy called James here asks, will your transmission devices be able to self-report on the physical condition of the car itself? So like broken knuckle or air hose or derailment, etc. Mike, what's the plan there?
Well, this gets into the safety critical side of this. It's not the initial thing that we'll be focusing on, but I think it's a critical outcome eventually. Again, once we convince, our operators and our mechanical department that we can deliver these data 99.9% of the time within 5 or 10 minutes, and it's actionable, then yeah, that stuff becomes really important. The accelerometer in and of itself, which will be a feature, will be able to report a lot of things, including, in some cases, derailments.
So let's just give a quick example of that. When we take the shock curve, something gets hit in the business, which happens often. The fact that 3G occurred is kind of irrelevant. You need to know 3G, for how long, the pattern of the curve, where it happened, and what time it happened. In the end, it's about what caused it. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, there's not only the ability to determine cause, but there's the sort of the immediate ability to accelerate response.
Okay, and then obviously your response might be to check if a derailment's happened, but let's just imagine that you're negotiating service level agreements with a third party who keeps mishandling things. What does that mean for the wider ecosystem, Adriene, in terms of, does this connect to insurance and finance and things like this?
Absolutely. I mean, the more objective information that we can have in terms of how we're dealing with each other as business partners, the better the answer can be for everybody. So whether it's behavior modification or it's people bearing the true cost of what they're inflicting upon the system, because this system is a system that, the acts of one shipper can have knock-on effects for a lot of other shippers who get tied up and involved in something that in better circumstances might not have happened, and create some negative impacts for everybody.
So we're driving account. Sorry, you go, Mike.
Yeah, let me give you an example here. If a shipper opens a boxcar and all the pallets are on the side, the shipper's going to be pretty sure there was an overspeed event somewhere between the origin and destination, and then it becomes the great finger pointing exercise. But think about it. You have an accelerometer. You got let's say you got a 9 mile an hour or 4G or whatever it is, impact. You say that's probably where it happened, and all of a sudden your whole claims process, et cetera. And for us, it's going to be a coaching and training moment. Hey, listen, we have a lot of overspeed events in this yard. Let's get back to coaching and training to make sure that we're switching at the right coupling speeds. It's also an inspection thing, saying, oh my God, I just had a 10 mile an hour overspeed event. We better inspect the knuckles. We better inspect the draft gear on this, because that usually results in damage to both of those.
Yeah, that's interesting. And actually, so when we talk about driving to an outcome, we're talking a bit here about accountability. We're talking about deciding or investigating causality. And we're talking about also share of wallet. So we actually pay people under new business models according to the value that they contribute or don't contribute. How far are we away from that? It's coming. It's a good idea, yeah?
You are always full of good ideas. Break the box, So that's an interesting one. I hadn't really thought about it. But I this idea of eliminating friction in the transactions, because we have the facts, we have shareable facts that we can agree on, that's huge in and of itself. There's a lot of negative customer experience that comes from these, as Mike called them, finger pointing exercises, or where we don't have enough information to be sure what the reason is this happens and who should sort of take the accountability.
I think the great thing about it, there's value for every participant in the rail ecosystem here. Think about the shippers, the value for them. This makes it a more predictable experience. They can ship more by rail. They can reduce their shipping cost. Right off the bat, there's value creation right there.
Yeah, and also the predictability, it gives everybody confidence, doesn't it, in the end? And also, when you think about, we're driving multimodality, we want to align shipping containers with rail cars. How do you make sure that happens? And actually, just looking back to the brakes example that we gave, Nexxiot have now closed a deal with Knorr-Bremse, New York Air Brake, as part of that group. And we're talking about digital rail brakes. And, a lot of these things, they're enablers. They create optionality. They create possibilities for future innovation. And I think that we have to realize that, we're in a journey, and we're actually in this together. And this is why this kind of event is important, because it's about communicating more broadly and taking the ideas out of our collective heads, putting them out there and letting other people think about them and drive innovation themselves. We're coming up to time here, and I'd like to just sort of, leave it to you two really to say any sort of the things that you think that maybe we need to emphasize, or things that haven't been covered particularly, before I do a wrap up. I think it's been a great discussion. I don't want to sort of try to unpack too many more things, but any comments from you, Mike, to wrap things up?
Yeah, two quick things. First of all, if anybody ever wants to talk about Railpulse, I'm always available to do that. I love talking about it, and there's so many nuances and details of it that we didn't cover here today. Second of all, there's an interesting question that I want to use. I saw one of the questions here is, locomotives get all this information. Why would you want to do this in cars? And that's a great question. I get it all the time. In the United States or North America, rail cars are detached from locomotives about 75% of the time. We're not trying to solve the problem of rail cars attached to locomotives. That's really where we have the best visibility. We're trying to solve all the problems associated with rail cars generally are not tied to rail, because that is where the real productivity opportunity, I think, is.
Yeah, that's really interesting. They still have no power. They obviously get left around in places. You never know what's happening when you don't have them in your own sort of, backyard. And it's always a question of what's happening with those individual assets. And we can look on an asset level, we can look on a component level, we can look at a fleet level, we can also look at a process level. And I think this is, obviously things that we can unpack in the future. Adriene, any last comments from your side, maybe taking the view of the wider supply chain again?
No, I think this has been a great discussion, Daniel and Mike. Always a great time to sit and have some interesting thoughts shared and questions asked. I really appreciate the audience tuning in. I think this is, as Mike said, this is a long journey. And I think, it's incumbent on all of us to figure out what we can do to make the whole system better, because we are incredibly reliant on this supply chain functioning well for the livelihoods of all of us and the good economic outcomes and business opportunities that exist when things do run well. So I'm looking forward to getting past the current state and looking towards what the future holds, because I think there's huge opportunities to see performance that we have never yet seen in the rail industry.
So to the audience, I'd just like to say thank you so much for joining us. And you can see, I'm sure everybody who witnessed this can see the passion and the direction and, what's on offer here and why we do this. Certainly at least a few insights into that. And obviously, it's up to all of us to think about what changes in terms of our thinking, our working methods, what capabilities should we be calling for, and how to look at partnerships. I think this is a real key thing that's come out of this discussion about how to work together, how to collaborate, how to share ideas, data, training sets, algorithms, etc. In conclusion, I'd just like to say this is an initiative which is to the benefit of all participants and particularly to railroaders. This is not about automation of processes to replace railroaders. We value the domain knowledge and the expertise and the great depth of experience of railroaders, and that this is to put the right tools in the hands of people who care passionately about this industry and to drive improvements across all different metrics. So I'd like to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Adriene. It's always a pleasure. Mike, thank you for joining us. I know you're super busy, and I wish you all the best with the next steps of bringing these different parties together and driving this forward. So thank you so much to everyone for joining. Thanks for your time, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.